Luke sat on the old wooden fence, his weathered hands resting on his knees as he gazed out at the wide, empty horizon. The sun was starting to set, casting a golden hue over the dusty land. It was a quiet evening, as they often were on his ranch. The wind was soft, the kind that made the tall grass ripple like an ocean, and the only sound he could hear was the occasional rustle of the cattle grazing lazily in the distance. He'd been alone for a long time. Too long, really. The silence was both a comfort and a weight. It wasn't that he didn't like his own company. He did, in a way. But sometimes the quiet got too loud, the emptiness of the house too heavy to bear. He had grown up here on this ranch with his brother Jack. They'd spent their days riding horses, working with cattle, and laughing around the campfire under the stars. Those were the best days of his life. But that had been before. Before the fire, before Jack had died. Luke had never really gotten over it. How could you? Losing someone who had been with you through every hardship, every joy, every adventure? It wasn't just the loss of a brother, it was the loss of a best friend, a partner, someone who knew you better than anyone else in the world. The empty saddle in the barn was a constant reminder. It had been Jack's saddle, worn, scratched, and comfortable from years of use. Luke could still see his brother riding in that saddle, his grin wide and carefree as they rode side by side. Now that saddle sat in the corner of the barn, untouched, collecting dust. Luke hadn't been able to part with it. It felt like if he let go of it, he'd be letting go of Jack, and he wasn't ready for that. But tonight, as he sat on the fence staring out at the endless plains, Luke thought about something he hadn't in a long time, the possibility of having someone to share his life with again. He had heard stories about men who lost their wives or children and found new purpose. They'd rebuild their lives, find new families, new joys. But Luke didn't know if he could ever open his heart to someone like that again. The pain of losing Jack had been too much. He sighed and ran his hand through his hair, wishing for something, anything to shake him from this endless cycle of solitude. The quiet had become too much to bear. That's when he saw him, a small figure walking down the dusty road leading to his ranch. At first, Luke thought it was just his mind playing tricks on him. He had been sitting out there for so long, perhaps he was starting to hallucinate. But as the figure came closer, Luke could see it was a boy. The boy was skinny, his clothes torn and dirty. His face was pale and his eyes looked tired. He couldn't have been more than 10 or 11, but the way he walked told Luke that this boy had seen things, had lived a life far more difficult than one so young should. Luke straightened up, his heart beating a little faster. He hadn't seen anyone come to his ranch in weeks. The boy stopped a few feet away from him, glancing up at Luke with cautious eyes. He was out of breath, his chest rising and falling as if he had been walking for hours. Luke's hand instinctively moved toward the rifle resting on the side of the fence, but he didn't draw it. There was something about this boy that didn't seem dangerous, just lost. "Can I help you, son?" Luke asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. The boy blinked, clearly nervous. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, then finally spoke. I've been walking for a long time," the boy said in a voice that trembled slightly. "I don't have anywhere else to go. I was wondering if you could help me." Luke raised an eyebrow. "Help you how?" The boy looked down at his shoes, kicking at the dirt nervously. "I don't have any family. I've been alone for a while now. I was hoping maybe you could adopt me, just for a day." Luke's heart stuttered in his chest. He blinked, not quite believing what he had just heard. A day? The boy wasn't asking for a permanent home, just for one day. But why? Why would a child want to be adopted by a stranger for such a short time? He studied the boy's face, trying to read him, but all he saw was pain. The kind of pain that comes from being abandoned, from having nowhere to go. The kind of pain Luke knew all too well. The cowboy stood up slowly, his boots scraping against the wooden fence. He ran a hand over his face, trying to think of the right words to say. "Adopt you for a day?" he repeated, his voice soft but laced with confusion. "Son, I don't have a family of my own. What would you want with someone like me?" The boy's eyes filled with a sadness that nearly broke Luke's heart. "I don't have anyone. I just wanted to know what it felt like to have someone care. Even if just for one day, please." Luke's throat tightened as he looked at the boy. His heart ached for him. He knew the feeling all too well. The emptiness of being alone. The longing for someone to take you in, to show you kindness, to offer a glimpse of what it might be like to have a family again. For a moment, Luke didn't know what to say. His mind raced, and all he could think about was the empty saddle in the barn, the way it had sat there all these years, a symbol of his own loneliness. He could see the boy's pain reflected in that empty space. Maybe he couldn't fix everything, but maybe he could offer the boy something, even if it was just for a day. The cowboy cleared his throat and nodded slowly. "All right, kid. You can stay for a day. We'll share a meal, maybe even take a ride if you're up for it. But just for today, you hear?" The boy's face lit up with a grateful smile, the kind of smile that made Luke feel like he had just done something worth doing for the first time in years. "Thank you," the boy said, his voice soft with gratitude. "You don't know what this means." Luke gave him a small smile in return, though it felt unfamiliar on his face. "I think I might. Come on, let's get you something to eat." The boy followed him to the house, his steps light now, his burden a little lighter. Luke's heart, too, felt a little less heavy, as though for the first time in a long time, the weight of his loneliness had been shared. They sat down at the small kitchen table, Luke serving the boy a warm meal, something simple, but enough to fill the emptiness in his stomach. They ate in silence, but it wasn't the uncomfortable kind of silence that usually hung between strangers. It was the kind of quiet that comes when two people are simply sharing a moment of peace. After dinner, Luke led the boy out to the barn. "I've got a saddle in here if you're up for a ride," Luke said, his voice gentler now. The boy's eyes sparkled with excitement. "Really?" Luke nodded and took the saddle off the rack. "It used to be my brother's. He was a good rider. I'm not sure you'll be able to ride alone just yet, but you can sit behind me." The boy smiled, and Luke helped him onto the horse. They set off, riding slowly across the plains. The cool evening air brushed against their faces, and the sound of the horse's hooves echoed in the quiet. For the first time in a long time, Luke didn't feel quite so alone. They rode together in silence, the sky growing darker as the stars began to appear, twinkling softly above them. It was a peaceful night, and for just a little while, Luke allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it was possible to find connection again, even in the most unexpected of places. And as they rode, Luke realized that sometimes a single day was all it took to change the course of a life. The moon had risen high in the sky, casting a silver glow over the plains. Luke and the boy rode silently side by side, the rhythm of the horse's hooves steady and comforting. The wind had picked up a little, the cool breeze ruffling their hair as it swept across the wide open land. It was the kind of night that made everything feel a little bit more peaceful, like the world had paused just for them. Luke had always found peace in the open spaces. The empty ranch, the cattle grazing in the distance, the quiet of the night, it all felt like a second home to him. But tonight something was different. There was someone with him now, a boy, a stranger. Yet for some reason it didn't feel that way. It felt like they had known each other for a long time, as if the land itself had brought them together for a reason. Luke looked over at the boy, who was sitting quietly behind him, his small hands gripping the saddle tightly. His eyes were wide, taking in everything around him, the vastness of the land, the beauty of the night. For a moment, Luke saw the same awe he had felt when he was young, the same excitement he used to get on his first rides with his brother Jack. "Is this what it's like here all the time?" the boy asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the sound of the wind. Luke smiled softly. "Yeah, mostly. It's quiet, but it's home." The boy nodded, as if understanding something Luke had never quite been able to explain. He didn't know why, but it seemed like the boy understood the beauty of the land, the way it could make you feel like you were part of something bigger, something timeless. They rode for hours, heading toward the small hill at the far end of the ranch. Luke knew that from there they could see the entire valley, stretching out in front of them like a sea of stars. It was one of his favorite spots, the place he always went to when he needed to clear his mind. When they reached the top, Luke dismounted and helped the boy off the horse. Together they walked to the edge of the hill and looked out at the view. The valley was bathed in moonlight, the silhouettes of trees and mountains standing tall against the star-filled sky. "This is beautiful," the boy said, his voice filled with wonder. Luke nodded, his heart swelling with a strange mix of pride and sadness. He hadn't shared this view with anyone in a long time, not since Jack, not since he'd lost his brother. "You know," Luke said, his voice softer now, "my brother used to love this view. We'd come up here every chance we got." I used to tell him that someday we'd own this whole valley. The boy looked up at him, sensing the sadness in Luke's voice. What happened to him? Luke's chest tightened at the question. He had known it was coming. It was inevitable, really.
He had never told anyone about Jack's death, not like this, not to someone who wasn't family.
But somehow it didn't feel wrong to tell this boy. He died, Luke said quietly. It was a long time ago. A fire. He didn't make it out. The boy's face softened with empathy. I'm sorry. Luke nodded, his throat tight. It's all right. It was a long time ago, but I still miss him every day. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind, the rustling of the grass beneath their feet. Luke looked out over the valley, his heart heavy but lighter than it had been in a long time. Talking about Jack felt strange, like a part of him that had been locked away for years was finally being set free. It felt good in a way, but also painful. I don't have any family, the boy said after a long pause. I've been on my own for as long as I can remember. Luke turned to look at him. The boy was staring at the ground, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked smaller than he had before, more fragile, like he was carrying a burden that no child should ever have to carry. Luke crouched down beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to be alone, you know. Not today. Not while you're here. The boy looked up at him, his eyes wide. Really, you mean it? Luke smiled softly. Yeah, I mean it. You can stay as long as you want. For a moment, the boy didn't say anything. He just stared at Luke as if trying to figure out whether the cowboy's words were real or just another kindness that would be taken away. But after a long moment, he nodded slowly. I don't know how to thank you, he said quietly. You don't have to, Luke replied, standing up and offering the boy a hand. You're family now, even if it's just for today. The boy's face brightened, a genuine smile spreading across his face. Family, he whispered to himself as if tasting the word for the first time. Together, they stood there for a while, watching the stars above them, the silence between them no longer heavy but filled with a quiet understanding. Luke had never expected this moment. He had never expected to find someone to share his life with again, even if just for a day. But somehow this boy had found his way into his life, and for the first time in years, Luke didn't feel so alone. The ride back to the house was slow, the horses' hooves echoing softly in the night. When they reached the barn, Luke tied the horse to the post and led the boy inside. The house was quiet, but there was something comforting about the stillness, something that made the walls feel less empty. Luke had a small fire burning in the stove, the warmth of the flames filling the room. He set out a bedroll for the boy, his mind still racing with thoughts of the day. He had shared more with this child than he had with anyone in years, and in return the boy had given him something he hadn't realized he needed, a sense of purpose, a reason to keep going. The boy climbed into the bedroll and pulled the blanket around himself, his eyes fluttering with exhaustion. Luke watched him for a moment before turning to leave. You can sleep easy tonight, Luke said softly. You're safe here. The boy nodded, his eyes already half closed. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick with sleep. Luke paused in the doorway, his heart full. He had never expected this day to turn out like this. A boy who had come to him with nothing, asking for a simple favor, had changed everything. Maybe Luke couldn't give him a permanent home. Maybe he couldn't fix everything that had happened in the boy's life, but he could give him something that meant more than he realized. Luke smiled softly to himself and closed the door behind him, leaving the boy to sleep peacefully for the first time in what felt like forever, and for the first time in a long while. Luke felt at peace with himself, knowing that he had done something good, something that mattered. He had given someone a chance, even if just for a day, and in doing so he had found a little piece of himself again.